All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of ArtEvolve. I am Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of Articheck and host of ArtEvolve this evening. And I would like to introduce you to James Quirk, who is the leading marketing manager at Queen's Fine Art, Logistics and Storage. Rob Eastman, who is the CEO at Double, Digitization and NFT Creation. John Sharples, who is an art and intellectual property lawyer with Canvas Art Law. And Ralph Lopez, head of crypto at Verse Inventory Management. So welcome. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. And I will kick this off, this discussion, which was about NFTs and how they're shaping the future of the art market. First thing we're going to do is have everyone just tell us a little bit more about themselves and introduce their organizations that they work with, their relevant background, and how they're kind of relevant to NFTs. I will start, I'll kick us off by starting myself. So my relationship to NFTs is fairly limited. It's not a huge part of my life as it is for some of you. The thing that I do have a kind of link to is AIS, which is a consortium of art tech startups. It's Art Identification Standard is what AIS stands for. The purpose of it is to create something that is like an ISBN number for the art and culture sector. So a unique identifying number for all cultural heritage and art objects globally using blockchain technology. And we at AIS, because the consortium consists of around 50 to 60 different companies, as well as lawyers, artists, shippers, insurers. We have AXA's joined us recently, and we are currently advising one of the big 5 advisory companies on behalf of a Ministry of Culture for a country who's looking to have all of the museums that it funds have a digital identity and library and kind of how to navigate that. So that's kind of what that is all about. And of course that includes NFTs, but is not limited to kind of the world of NFTs. But my hope is really that NFTs will help kind of move us in a direction where we have more infrastructure. That's what AIS is all about, is future-proofing the art world, creating a infrastructure for the future of more digital and hybrid transactions, research, provenance, and all the different kind of facets, engagement of art, and collecting and enjoying, and academia, and kind of all the different facets of art. So that's my angle. That's why I'm here. My background is as a conservator restorer, so I normally have that kind of hat on somewhere in the background of my mind. And then I turned into an entrepreneur who tried to create, or not just tried, have created an international industry standard for digital condition reporting. So I'm also kind of all about like creating digital standards. It's like my area. So that's me. James, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I'm James, as you mentioned, and I am lead marketing manager at Queen's. So we're a fine art, logistics and installation provider. And as you would probably assume with that, a lot of what we do is focused on the physical kind of side of things in the art world. So, the more traditional kind of side of things when it comes to painting, sculpture, installation. But where we kind of start to cross over with NFTs is within my role, it's kind of looking at how kind of developments within the art market and industry can affect us as maybe one of the more traditional providers. So it's looking at, assisting with 3D scanning, for example. Fine art technicians are definitely needed within that process. Whether, this is looking a little bit further into the future, but how the metaverse can have an impact on, our own services, and whether actually there's space for virtual viewing rooms rather than a traditional storage facility. And then looking at also, NFTs, as many people think, are artworks, but they're also not necessarily always artworks. So a lot of the time, NFTs can be things like tokens, and whether they can be used as tickets for entry. So my role is, I guess, a little bit broad in the sense that it's definitely got that traditional side, but we've been looking a lot at the moment with a few people on the call as to how actually we can future-proof the logistics business and the logistics side of the art world to make sure that it's accommodating and adapting for NFTs, which I think we'll touch on, but sounds like they're definitely here to stay.
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I first saw that you were being proposed to speak about NFTs, I thought, really? So yeah. I'm sure a lot of people in our virtual space will be like, yeah, what's a shipper doing talking about NFTs? So I think that is a really interesting aspect that maybe people haven't necessarily thought of yet. So John, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, so I work for Canvas Art Law, which is a boutique art market specialist law firm. My background is in corporate intellectual property, and I used to work for big media firms and banks and tech firms. About 5 years ago, in the big firm I worked for, I became the self-appointed blockchain specialist within the firm, and I've put that to one side as I moved increasingly towards an art specialism. But obviously, in the last 18 months, those worlds have very much converged. And talking in January 2021, I said to my colleague that I think this NFT thing is going to be something. And of course, it has swept over what I do like a tsunami. And now I would say today, over half of the work I do has an NFT dimension. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Sorry. Yes, that's quite interesting that it has so rapidly changed your kind of day-to-day working life. So Ralph, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rafe.
Sorry, Rafe.
No worries. I'm head of crypto at Verse, and we are building an NFT platform which is sort of really focused on bringing the highest level of contemporary art to the blockchain. I've sort of got involved in cryptocurrencies fairly early on, and I was a student studying history of art. And so when NFTs came around, it was a fairly obvious match for me. But as we're seeing, these platforms are sort of aggregators for collectibles and everything. So we thought we need a really curated platform focused on art.
Cool. And Rob, would you like to go next?
Hi guys, thanks to Annika and Articheck team for having us on. I'll try and be quick, which I'm not usually very good at, but I'll try and speed through. So
I'll be the timekeeper, don't worry.
My name's Rob Eastham. I'm founder and CEO of Double. Some of you might have heard of us as Reality 01, which was our original name before we rebranded as Double. We are an ultra realistic 3D scanning company that specializes in scanning artworks for artists, galleries, and art collectors. My background's in computer science, so I've got BSc in Artificial Intelligence and Information Systems from back in 1995. I kind of spotted the web early on and kind of specialized it in that. I think that over the last 5 years, I've kind of had my eye on kind of immersive technologies and virtual reality, that kind of thing. That's what led me to kind of jumping ship from running kind of rather large digital departments at some of the UK's biggest ad agencies to founding my own startup, which was Double, and kind of seeing that I think over the next kind of 5 to 10 years, we'll start to see a transition from kind of web-based, screen-based technologies into these kind of more immersive, I hate the term metaverse. It reminds me of the information superhighway, which is what we used to call the internet many years ago. I'm not sure the metaverse is going to stick, but this is the kind of thing that we've been interested in. So we kind of formed the company just under 5 years ago. We have recently been granted a patent for our kind of hardware and software which allows us to capture these very, very high definition scans. We're currently working with a number of galleries, including White Cube, Victoria Miro. We've done some work for David Schwerner. We're kind of, you know, we put whole teams in to do these scans and then deliver the actual kind of results. And perhaps in a little while, I think when we get on to explaining the NFT stuff, I'll do a bit of a screen share and you'll be able to see the kind of quality of the scans that we produce. So that's me, really.
You're muted, Annika.
You're muted, Annika.
Sorry, I'm not used to muting myself. There's noises going on in the background. I believe that we have that slotted for now, Rob, if you want to share that with us.
Yeah, I can just bring that up. Really, it's just a kind of a couple of slides to kind of give you our, let's just see, can you see this screen now? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, really just wanted to kind of, for those completely new to NFTs, which I'm sure most people on here will kind of, you know that for the majority of people, NFTs mean or may mean, you know, JPEGs that are kind of digital only artworks that kind of utilize blockchain in order to kind of keep track of those things. So if we kind of just, there's all kinds of fairly complicated NFT diagrams that could have gone through, but I thought I'd keep it simple for now. You know, essentially it boils down to an artist creating a piece of work. Most of the time that's digital. It doesn't have to be, but most of the time that's what we're seeing at the moment. Artist obviously retains all of their copyrights and they're able to kind of mint using services like OpenSea that you might have heard, where we will create a unique smart contract that sits on the blockchain. This will then get listed on those marketplaces for sale, where people can then go on to kind of buy those pieces. And, you know, the kind of slightly provocative kind of title of this webinar, you know, are NFTs bad for art? Well, I think it depends on your perspective. You know, lots of people, you look at traditional art world, you know, lots of people like video art, but probably most people in, you know, traditional art world would say that the bulk of what, you know, people are interested in when it comes to the art world are paintings and sculptures. So I think that, you know, there's always going to be a place for these kind of digital only pieces of art. You know, we started off with the original NFTs, which were these kind of Pepe the Frog NFTs from, I think this is going back like 7 years ago. We then had a number of different iterations. We've obviously all heard of, you know, the Beeple sale and the Bored Apes. I think the question that we ask ourselves as a company that's interested in scanning physical pieces of art is, what else could NFTs be? And could they be more than, you know, what the bulk of what we see at the moment, which is kind of JPEGs or digital representations or digital only pieces of artwork? Could these experiences be kind of more visceral? Could they be more like actually visiting a gallery? And this is kind of how we got our original investment money through selling the idea that our hardware and software could produce such high quality scans of real world objects that when you experience them using things like virtual reality, that they, you know, they come very close to the kind of real experience. I don't think any of us would say, you know, the primacy of actually going to a gallery where it's been properly curated, you can see the physical art world. That's always going to be the, you know, the primary experience if you can get to the gallery and see that. But are there other ways that we can use technology to kind of get close to that experience? And that's something that we've kind of been, you know, looking at. So, you know, going back to our, you know, the little diagram earlier on, you know, how do we get physical artworks into these things? And it's a difficult problem, as we've discovered, trying to build the hardware that lets you do this effectively. And, you know, the kind of thing that we've done is, if you look at the behind me, you'll see that the thing that I'm about to show you, which is one of our test pieces of artwork, which we call the Sphinx. And you can see that once we've digitized this piece of artwork, we can get incredibly high quality for the actual piece itself. But even what you're seeing on screen at the moment is relatively low quality. And if you were to put it into kind of an immersive environment, it wouldn't really hold up. So this model that we're seeing here might look good on screen, but it's going to fall apart and look blurry as we, try these new devices that are going to come out. So we've really kind of prided ourselves on trying to kind of make sure that we capture this ultra high resolution detail. So these videos that you see now is more akin to what we try to capture, where you'd be hard pressed to kind of tell whether this was a real video or a kind of virtual video. And in fact, it's a virtual video. This entire studio is built virtually, the plinth, the model as you've seen, and we could actually go and stand in this space in virtual reality. So you kind of see that although we think the future of these scans is in VR devices, we do actually have ways that we can kind of use these things with existing technologies like iPads. So you can kind of see that we can also kind of place these things in spaces. We can use them on social media platforms. So all of these that you see here are virtual studios with our kind of scans inside them. If I actually just go here, I'll just show you, some of you guys might have been to Bermondsey over to Whitecube, who we had been lucky enough to be their in-house 3D scanning team there. So this is one of our very latest scans. So you can kind of see the bridge between the kind of JPEGs, which I think have their place, and people do like collecting these things. I think you can debate whether they're good for art or not. Some people would say yes, some people would say no. I think our question is, how do we kind of bridge the gap to kind of create these things as experiences that feel like the real world? And that's kind of what we've been striving towards doing as a company, I guess. You can kind of see here as well, this is actually, so we don't have to be in VR for everything. You can kind of see that we've got these extremely high resolution and also importantly scans that reflect and react to the physics of the light as you would expect them to do in the real world, which a lot of scanning technologies do not allow you to do. So I suppose this is kind of our concern at the moment, is that if you try and put a 3D model on one of these platforms like OpenSea, so this is a rock that we have scanned in with our scanner and minted on OpenSea. And the problem is, this is all you can do with it. You can just pop it up on screen, and they force you into having quite a low quality version of it. And there just isn't this kind of focus on how do you get real things to be experienced. And that's something that I hope we can kind of debate a little bit and see whether there's interest in that kind of side of stuff.
Interesting. And I'm also, it's interesting how you compared it with video art, because my mother, growing up, my mother was a video installation artist. So I grew up as a child following her around while she was making crazy videos in LA in the 90s. She was also part of a thing called Cyber Players, which was an early 90s artist group that did like interpretation of people would write scripts all around the world, and then they would act them out in a play, and that would be filmed and across like multiple sites globally. And that was one of the first super highway things you mentioned in the cyberverse back in the day, in like 1992. So it's interesting to kind of see some things coming a little bit full circle. It reminds me of when you talk about the future of art and how we might experience it, it makes me think a little bit about Ready Player One, which also made me think a lot about her early days in the early 90s, going to like moos and muds and things, and experiencing text-based realities that people would create and whole worlds and stuff, and how in a way it was much freer back then because you didn't have the kind of constraints that you have nowadays with massive multiplayer universes and things like that, where you're a little bit more constrained by the set of rules that have been constructed. So it will be interesting to see if we can get to a place in the further future, which is kind of bridging that gap, as you say, of being more flexible and more creative and more free. And it will be, you know, I hope that we're all in this room part of creating that future. That would be pretty cool.
I agree. I think to just finish off on that thought, I think when I speak to a lot of traditional artists working in traditional media, a lot of them are quite negative about NFTs, and I think perhaps it's because they don't work as digital artists, so they don't see a kind of way into this thing. And you know, a simple picture of a painting or a sculpture is not the same as being somewhere where, you know, the light kind of can kind of react to the piece as you walk around it. And I think that's the bit that's kind of unknowable at this point, and we're right at the very beginning of, you know, this. I don't even really think we've got to the brick phone stage of kind of these immersive devices, but I think we will kind of see that change over time. And I think it's going to be great to see how this, you know, NFTs, if you want, you know, or digital versions of real world things can kind of play into that.
So before we get, and I'm just conscious of time, but before we get too stuck into the future of NFTs, do you want to, I think you have a couple of visuals around just the basics of clarifying, you know, what is an NFT and how does it work?
Well, yeah, I kind of ran through that earlier on the slide. I mean, I think John, to chuck this over to John, I would say that John probably going to be able to give, in terms of traditional NFTs, has a lot more experience with, you know, with that kind of stuff. So I would hand over to John, actually, if he's willing to.
Okay, by me. Is that all right with you, John?
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't prepared an introduction to what NFTs are, and obviously it's a moving target, because one of the things that's quite popularly said is that an NFT is tantamount to a digital certificate of authenticity, and in some ways that's right, but in other ways it falls quite a long way short of explaining what is possible within those lines of code, and how the code itself can create something that is programmatic in a way that is the work itself, and not just a certificate related to some separate entity that is the work. I mean, the main thing, of course, is just introducing tradability to something that wasn't otherwise tradable. And you know, I said that when I became a self-appointed blockchain guru back in 2017, I thought there were only two good use cases for blockchains as I saw it. One was for cryptocurrencies, store of value and encouragement of speculation, and the other was as an authentication process for digital artworks at the moment of creation. And I wish I had done more with that insight in the time since. But yeah, it's just that it creates a secondary market that wasn't there before, and I'm interested in that as it applies to digital art, but also as it applies to things like performance art and conceptual art and other things that have traditionally failed to find a critical mass in terms of not only a primary market but a secondary market as well. So yeah, I think for most people, thinking of it as a digital certificate of authenticity is a good way in, but with the caveat that that also falls short of explaining all of the things it makes possible. And so in my work, I'm seeing people increasingly interested in the idea of artists having a contractual resale royalty, because something that is NFTs makes possible. And that NFTs, when people talk about smart contracts, it's the ultimate misnomer, because they are neither smart nor are they contracts, but they are lines of self-executing code. And I think artists find it so attractive that I know that Rob said lots of artists have been tentative, and that's true, but a lot of artists find it very attractive, the idea that in code you might just have it so that if X plus Y, then you will get Z, and no one can fail or intervene or let you down. That's quite an attractive thing. And the idea of a creator benefiting from every secondary sale, yeah, that's something that artists find very attractive.
Yeah, I'd say as well, John, for us, the thing that has kind of been interesting is this idea of the kind of I think maybe we'll get onto this in more detail later on, is the fractionalization of these things as well, so that you kind of do end up with the ability for, you know, the artist both to have that thread of secondary sales all the way through. And I'm kind of something that you might be able to kind of answer in terms of the legal kind of portion of it, because I know that there's resistance from some collectors, obviously, to this idea that secondary sales could get enshrined into the you know, if they buy the primary work and then they sell it on, you know, I've heard, you know, different sides from different collectors. I know that there was some kind of legal precedent in the EU for kind of secondary sales that is kind of, that it's a more friendly environment anyway for that versus like the States, for instance. And is that something that, I don't know whether you're seeing that that's something that feels like it might get enforced via smart contracts before it gets enforced in traditional law anyway?
Yeah, totally. There's always been this cultural divide between the European idea that actually the artist and their family should benefit from secondary sales. And so we have in EU law and still in UK law, the idea of a statutory artist resale right. It's very ungenerous and excludes quite a few categories of work, but it is there. Whereas in the US, the various initiatives to try and introduce that have never really succeeded. And broadly, Americans seem to regard it as being a restriction on property rights that's inappropriate. And there have been also attempts in the US to introduce contractual resale rights as a kind of optional possibility. And it's never really taken off, because until something like that becomes a market standard, collectors are always able to say, well, no, you're asking for something unusual, you're asking for something that's off market. But I do think that the values of the NFT world are starting to seep back into the physical world, because I'm having lots more conversations about contractual resale royalties in relation to physical artworks now.
Well, and I'm interested in that exact point, because I think there's like a lot of directions that we could take this conversation, right? Because in terms of what are the possibilities of NFTs and how they will affect, you know, the art market in general, physical works, museums, shippers, you know, lots of different folks. And I think obviously one way that you can look at them as well is as a merchandise thing, right? From a museum standpoint, they can mint works and it can be the equivalent of a kind of a limited edition print, which is also true for artists. And, you know, you can create the digital asset version of a physical work. And I think that as we get to that point, that's when a lot of more players, more traditional players will become more interested. And we are, I mean, that is happening now. So we are at that point, I guess. And that is one of the things that Rob is looking to help with, you know, the gap that he's hoping to bridge with his company, as he mentioned. And so I think that that's really interesting. And when we get to that kind of, you know, critical mass where it's not just about digital art from digital artists production, but also is bringing in physical art and also not replacing, but augmenting merchandise in terms of, you know, editioned prints and things that we would normally buy in real life. But if you can imagine, you know, going to see a museum when you're on holiday and really enjoying a piece of art and wanting to get a print and not having to lug it home in your suitcase, but getting a, you know, digital version that you can display at home on your digital screen, you know, that's an example of a use case, right, for the future of NFTs and how more people can engage with them and enjoy them. And so I think one of the interesting things to think about is whether, you know, some people view this as something which is just for the wealthy or very niche. And I mean, personally, I think it's also interesting that NFTs are allowing us to access a new market, right? There's a new source of collectors that we haven't previously seen, which is, and personally, I'm not very knowledgeable about how big that market is, how extensive it is, who it is, what their kind of profile is, you know, what they're into and how they will affect the overall market in the future. But I think that that's an interesting aspect. And also my hope is very much that that this will drive a change, as I said, in the infrastructure of the future of the digital art market that will affect the general physical art market and will allow us to, more future-proof, where transactions and things happen generally, in terms of my AIS hat on. But I'm curious what you all think in terms of, is this something that is going to democratize art and make it more accessible for normal people, for different kinds of people, and what do you think that the, establishment, as it were, thinks about that, and kind of at what point do you think that they will recognize the validity of NFTs, or do you think we're already there? We've had this big auction result, that's obviously a big milestone. And so, are we here? Do we have a little ways to go? What are your thoughts?
I'd say, Annika, that, I mean, sorry, to just qualify as well, I should say that Double's kind of primary core business is not NFT, is not NFTs as a service. We primarily do our scanning so that people who have contemporary pieces of art to sell can use the materials that we produce from the scans to help with the sales of those scans, and kind of allow people to see the scans virtually. You can kind of place the things in your room and this kind of thing. And in answer to the question, could this kind of thing democratize? How can we, is there an appetite? At the moment, we've found that our clients find value in the things that we scan just to support the traditional art market. But is there a possibility where, we can democratize some of this because there's a value put on the digital asset itself? So separate to the physical piece of artwork, there's some value given to that, to the actual digital representation of a physical piece of artwork. And I think that it's difficult to, if we're talking about physical art, it's difficult to kind of know, where that will end up going, and whether it is something that is appealing to people. My hunch is that yes, it will be. And I don't think it necessarily has to be limited to just the kind of, the wealthiest. It could, there's all, as we mentioned earlier on, the fractionalization of these things can allow for cooperatives to kind of buy into these things. I think I have questions over, what does that look like with, physical pieces of artwork? Should, if you create a digital representation of a physical piece of art, should you write into the smart contract that's attached to that NFT, or the rules that are based on the NFT, that it always needs to, it can only travel with the physical piece of art, or can they be split? There's some big questions like that, because I think that a lot of, there could be concern that you kind of devaluing or kind of splitting off the potential, the potential real artwork by kind of having some other kind of instrument, like kind of digital version of that can live separately. I'd be interested to kind of get what people's views are on that, really, whether anyone's actually kind of given much thought to that. I don't know whether you've come across that, John, with anyone like wanting to actually, have you dealt with any physical NFT contracts yet, would you say?
No, not yet. It's been entirely digital native works that I've worked on so far.
Yeah.
But I'm interested. Yeah, I'm interested in what Rafe's got to say over a platform to sort of bring fine art to the NFT world. So, Rafe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. I think the democratization is definitely a big part of the whole thing. Fractionalization can be great, not just in the financial sense, but in terms of really feeling ownership and a sense of enjoyment from it. I would point out that there are cheap NFTs. You don't have to buy on mainnet Ethereum. You can buy a sort of customized generative piece of art on Tezos for $5 or so. But I think sort of the main part is democratizing access to the art world from the artist's side. These are, whether it's true or not, they're perceived as very gated institutions. And the fact that anyone can upload their art and can market it themselves and can be successful from that is a pretty big thing.
Maybe we should talk for a moment about fractionalizing, since that has come up a few times. Would someone like to explain kind of the concept of fractionalized ownership and how NFT relates to that? John, maybe it would be appropriate.
Sure. Well, over a number of years, people have been talking about fractionalized ownership of artworks separately from NFTs. So the idea that 1,000 people could each own a small share in a Picasso and therefore have access to this exciting, potentially lucrative market that they would otherwise be shut out from because it's such high values involved.
Yeah, Artfina is an example of a New York-based startup that has a fund for that, and also Feral Horses, which I think was purchased by another company a few years ago.
Yeah, and there are all kinds of regulatory difficulties around selling investments, collective investments in assets, and typically when that sort of activity is undertaken, it is within a regulated framework that protects grannies from losing their savings, and it's a world that's reserved for sophisticated or qualified investors, and so anyone who's tried to do that has so far found it quite difficult to tread that line and make sure they do it in a way that's regulatory sound. Yeah, NFTs are an interesting idea for helping this along, but the extent to which ownership of a digital asset could give you an ownership interest in a physical item is tough from a legal point of view, because it might be that owning your digital token gives you a contractual right. Someone's promising you that as the owner of this token, I have a contractual obligation to give you, let's say, a 1% share in this Picasso. But it's not really it's very difficult to make it an actual ownership right, so that, for example, the Picasso can't be sold without your permission. If you had an actual proprietary right, you could stop that sort of thing happening. But actually, I don't think anyone has found a way to do that yet. And so I think we're quite a long way away from NFTs providing a satisfactory way to fractionalized high-value artworks.
Well, one of the things that we want to do with our AIS consortium is to create a shared economy where there could be a lot of different players who are providing different services to do things like that. And I think that, for example, one of the challenges, I guess, in that situation is connecting the physical to the digital asset, right? And so, there are several emerging companies, Authentify is one, ArtClear is another, who are creating solutions to help. TagSmart is another one. There's some that are dealing with, physically tagging works. There's others that are, there's all kinds of different technology that's being employed to try and, imaging is another thing, using material spectroscopy. ArtClear is using technology that is from printing, so with the printing world. And so, yeah, there's like lots of different approaches to this kind of physical to the digital link, right?
Yeah, definitely for the practical challenge of physically associating the physical object with the digital token. So yeah, as you say, it could be a hologram, it could be a near field communication chip, as we have in Oyster cards. It could be all sorts of things. So there's the practical challenge on the one side, but actually I think the more severe challenge is the legal challenge. First of all, as soon as you're doing anything like this, you're into the world of securities and the regulatory regimes that come with that, and that is quite an onerous thing for most people to deal with and understand. Yeah, and as I say, just the fact that legally it's quite hard to tether a digital token to a physical object, other than a contractual promise, which for most people, if you really wanted to feel like you had an ownership stake in a valuable object, you'd want something more than a contractual promise, so that, if it was sold from underneath you, you'd have a right to go and claim your share of the object, even in the hands of the next buyer, who perhaps didn't know about the fractionalized aspect of it. So there's a lot to work out there, and I actually think we're quite some way away from that being worked out.
I'd agree. I think I'd agree with that, John. Do you see a difference between, conceptually, the same problems that you might attribute to the physical work as you've just described? If, for instance, one of our scans is digitized and people start to attribute value to the digital version, the digital replica, really you run into the same issues. One of the things that I think a lot of people, maybe more people realize it now, but they'll be surprised to learn, is that, the smart contracts that, or the NFTs that are kind of stored on the blockchain, the actual data is not stored on the blockchain. All you've got is something that points to, in the early days, it might have just been a URL on a web server that you actually didn't really know was going to get backed up. It could easily be that the hosting company goes bust, and or the hard drive is not backed up because it was hosted somewhere, and it kind of disappears. The same thing kind of becomes true for for anything, because in a sense that means the digital version is like a physical version. There's no real link. You can't store the physical thing on a blockchain, and most of the things that people are buying digitally as digital only are not actually on the blockchain either. So it's kind of the same things that apply presumably to the actual files that constitute the JPEG or the scan or the whatever it is that you're talking about. Do you see a difference between the two in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, the standards, that's a great example where there were news articles written in the early days of NFTs where people said, oh, it just points to URL. That link could be severed at any time. And then very quickly it became a standard to use some kind of distributed hosting of the media file like IPFS, where there isn't one server that it's sat on that could be severed at any time. So it's distributed in much the same way as like the ledger of transactions is. And now you're seeing more and more on-chain art where there's very sophisticated coding to somehow have the code itself generate the image, and you might have to have a kind of interpreter that interacts with the code that's on chain, but in a meaningful way the image can be on chain. So I think all of that's going to change, and I have clients who struggle with exactly what you've described, which is to show something on OpenSea it has to be under 200 megabytes as a file, and on most platforms to mint it has to be under 50 megabytes, and so that's obviously a huge limitation at the moment. Yeah, but I definitely see people seeing the value of these things. And one of the things I would say about what your product is, and we haven't rehearsed this endorsement, is that not only is it, you've completely removed my skepticism about online viewing rooms, because as an experience, not only does it get close to reality, it gives you something additional to reality, when you can turn a 3D object through every angle and see it from underneath when you can't in real life. And so it gives you a new sense of what a 3D object is that actually is better than the real thing. And I can definitely imagine people valuing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting actually to be interesting to see what the comments from listeners who are kind of involved in traditional artwork. A lot of our existing clients who actually really resist that, that kind of desire to pick things up and stuff, because it kind of maybe, cheapens the work, or, and I think it kind of talks a broader point as well. People talk about democratization and will this, disrupt the big players in the art world. I don't think so. I think that, I think whether you like it or not, it's like the galleries and the gallery kind of, the galleries that look after their artists, they bring something to the table, and they just need to, they will adapt over time so that they are bringing the same, sets of expertise to their artists, so their artists can focus on making the work, and that they actually, the big kind of gallery brands are going to kind of be important for that kind of thing. So I think although we might find that, it's easier for people to mint stuff if there's the art mark. There was a recent report which I'll try and find to put in the notes, that kind of talked about how there's a real top heavy amount of activity. There's lots of NFTs that just go untouched, and they don't ever even get an initial bid. And I think that there's going to be,
sorry to interrupt, but in terms of democratization, my personal view is that it's not about necessarily disrupting established galleries and how and their working practices and their collectors and how they do things. It's more about bringing art to people that currently don't collect art, right? We have, there's so many, 7 billion people in the world, and there's 5,000 serious art collectors in the world. That's a huge disparity. Everyone can and should enjoy art in their lives to some degree, right? And so I think that's the hope, right, in terms of democratization. James,
in the consumption of it, you mean, Annika? Yeah. I would hope that the digitization of any of these things allows it to kind of be in more than one place and perhaps more convenient to kind of view. So yeah, hopefully it can definitely democratize things in that sense. Yeah.
So James, I would like, just I'm conscious of the time. We have about 10 more minutes. We were going to talk also about the sustainability aspect of NFTs, which we'll get onto in a moment. But first, I want to ask.
Rafe would definitely be good on that one, but yeah, continue.
Yes, I want to ask James about, in terms of your work, how has that gone? I guess that's like a early days situation in terms of assisting clients with scanning and with things around NFTs. Can you describe a little bit further about?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the time people seem to think that NFTs are threatening the traditional art market, and I think my experience with that, or at least our approach at kind of Queens, is that it isn't doing, and it doesn't necessarily need to. It's just a different part of the art market. And I think the way that we have tried to interact with NFTs is, like you say, through the ability to assist with 3D scanning. So like Rob mentioned there, you still do need fine art technicians to handle those works when they are physical and they are being scanned. Just because they're being made into a digital format doesn't mean that actually you don't need the real life professionals to actually handle those works correctly. But I think there's always, I mentioned at the start, I think there's always going to be a place for physical artworks. I mean, we're not talking, I don't think anyone on this call will think that NFTs are going to replace physical artwork. So there's always going to be, a need for art storage, whether that's storage of physical works or, storage of NFTs, and that's a completely different conversation, I guess. And then I think there's more kind of exciting areas that, that actually NFTs could begin to play a role in within the traditional art logistics market. And I think one of those would be the idea of tokens. So we were having a discussion in the office this week actually around how tokens can be used, not necessarily NFTs as an artwork, but as a mechanism for either membership or access to certain areas of the business that maybe other clients wouldn't have access to without access to tokens. So that's something that I think is super early days and probably a little bit early to talk about, but it's those kind of conversations that I think businesses need to be having, is not necessarily seeing NFTs as a threat to the art market, but seeing how their businesses can use them. Because there was a poll, actually, I saw Art Basel put it out on LinkedIn yesterday, and it was talking, I think Art Basel themselves actually said, are NFTs here to stay? And 73%, when I last looked yesterday, of people that had clicked had said yes. So, it's about understanding how it's going to kind of affect businesses moving forwards. And I think your idea around sustainability, Rafe was actually, I think, talking around the idea that different, and you might need to tell me more about this, Rafe, because I definitely don't know, but that different currencies have different impacts on the environment, and some are actually much more sustainable than others. So perhaps we go on to that. But I'm also conscious that there's a question in the chat from Eve a while ago, and I think that might be roughly what we're talking about, is how you exhibit digital art. There's still going to need to be someone to install the ability for you to exhibit those as well. So whether that's a screen in your home, which arguably could be more easy to install than a painting, or it might be something much more elaborate. We're only seeing NFTs in the early days. It could be a completely immersive environment. So that's something that you've got to make sure that your technicians are actually thinking about now, and we're training up the expertise in that space as well.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think that is a good question and a good point. And there's it's like a whole spectrum, isn't it, between kind of physical and virtual reality, because and everything in between, in terms of like, you know, there's augmented reality, and there's, you know, the 3D scans that you can put on your computer, and you can assist physical sales and art fairs when you can't make it in person to see, or even if you did and you want to look at the bottom, or, you know, it's kind of about flexibility, I think now. I think what we're moving now into is a really interesting time of a hybrid approach. You know, everything was in real life, and then because of the pandemic, everything was online. And now we're at this point where we're like, we really love to see each other when we can, because it's been a while, but we're not always able. You know, I had to miss the Art Business Conference a few weeks ago because of COVID, and I was sad not to see people that I would have liked to have seen, but you know, it's still affecting us. I think for most events, and art fairs included, and you know, the future is really a hybrid future where you know, you need that flexibility of, I wanted to go, but in the end I couldn't for whatever reason, and or even, you know, it's around the world and I'm trying to watch my carbon footprint, and so I'm not going to go to Hong Kong this year. I'll go every 3 years, but I do want to see what the OVR looks like, or, you know, whatever it might be. But so why don't we talk? We have about 5 minutes left. Rafe, do you want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of currencies and their environmental impact, as far as you know?
Yeah, sure. I mean, everyone probably hears in the news daily about how NFTs are destroying the planet. I don't think that's entirely true, but obviously you've got to acknowledge at the moment we're using proof of work chains, Ethereum and Bitcoin for currencies that do require a lot of energy to maintain. It's necessary at the moment to maintain their security and the decentralization. I would say watch out for ETH2. I think sometime in the next year or so, we'll see the merge, and mainnet Ethereum transactions will be 0.02% of the emissions. I mean, it's a work in progress. I would also say that due to the tiny margins in the mining business, around 75% of miners are operating on renewable energy. So,
Rafe, would you say that? I mean, we're actually trying to do a pilot at the moment. Over the next 6 months, we're effectively looking for 5 artists or owners of collections, or you know, kind of foundations to kind of to do a kind of test run of it, to go through the process, almost like a test net of, you know, physical to digital to smart contract. We've assessed the number of blockchains that you mentioned, proof of work and proof of stake. And for those that don't know the difference, proof of work is the mining that you hear about that uses all that energy. And there's one of the other kind of types of way of securing blockchains uses something called proof of stake, which uses significantly less energy. It seems to me that most of the activity and most of the marketplaces are based on Ethereum, you know, or layer 2 Ethereum kind of protocols. I think from the research that I've done, and there's been talk of this for a long time, I think, is it the Casper kind of project that will basically move Ethereum into this, what you just described, the 0.02% of the emissions. So we won't be using mining anymore to secure the blockchain. We'll be using something that is more akin to this proof of stake. And it seems that, you know, Vitalik Buterin, who invented Ethereum, talked about, you know, this happening years ago, and it seems to keep, the target keeps moving. And for us, doing a kind of this pilot that we want to do with these 5 artists, we need to kind of get feedback, because it's our beliefs are that we've got to, if we ever have a product that we produce off the back of our pilot, it has to be zero emissions. You know, it has to be carbon neutral, and that is what will be demanded by us, certainly from, you know, our existing clients, most of whom are members of the, you know, the Gallery Climate Coalition and this kind of thing. I mean, we've assessed a couple of things that are off Ethereum, but they don't have the marketplace. They don't have the eyeballs to kind of make it worthwhile. So it's kind of a bit of a chicken and the egg situation at the moment, as do we take a punt and just run with Ethereum, hoping that, you know, we can give, you know, clients assurance that it's going to change and it won't be a problem in the long term? Or will people insist that, as of, conscious kind of, you know, big galleries with their corporate responsibility, quite rightly trying to reduce their emissions. Lots of them who are on the Gallery Climate Coalition have, you know, kind of signed up to cutting their emissions by, I think it's 40% by 2030. You know, if it ends up being another 5 years with Ethereum, how do you balance that? So do you have any kind of blockchains that you think people should be looking at that maybe will get ahead of Ethereum and do have enough eyeballs on them at the moment?
Algorand has said that they're pledging to be the greenest one, right?
Yeah, there are chains out there that are claiming to be green. I mean, usually this comes at a trade-off from the trilemma. You know, you're sacrificing decentralization or security to improve scalability.
Yeah.
There's also private chains as another option, right? Which is a little bit counter to maybe what blockchain is actually all about, which is a bit of an issue.
Private chains are, you're seeing more and more side chains and roll-ups that still rely on Ethereum, which obviously you get the security of Ethereum and then the benefits of very low transaction fees and low emissions as a result of that. I would say the ZK roll-ups are looking pretty good at the moment. And apart from that, Immutable is a very good marketplace.
I am in conversation with someone who's developed their own private chain, and it's still like an early conversation, but we're also, one of the things that we aim to do at AIS is to provide some guidance for the art market in this area, and to do some reviews and analysis of you know, the marketplace with blockchain. And we're building our prototype using Ethereum, but we're very conscious also of these eco issues, and would prefer not to go down the road that Rob mentioned of, you know, committing to a chain that says they're going to do something but hasn't done anything yet. We'd much rather kind of contact some people from that chain and say, hey, we would love to put our whole industry on your chain, but we won't do it until you actually take action. And in the meantime, we'll be over here, or, you know, however that looks. But I think that that's a really important aspect to consider. Obviously, we don't want to go down the road of starting a big infrastructure on a unsustainable method. So we have, I think we're going to stop there. We have got a couple of questions. If you guys have a few moments, are you good to stay over a few moments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So let me just see. So Eve, who is asking about how a collector would exhibit a piece, is also curious about what actual enjoyment can be had from a piece of digital art. Well, I think, Eve, clearly there are people that enjoy digital art because there is a thriving marketplace. And so, I mean, I don't know if we can really hash that out in this call in terms of people that do or don't take enjoyment from digital art. But I think that, you know, just as when I was growing up with my mother, who was a video installation artist, you know, at that time in the 90s, there was a lot of questions around how, you know, does video art count as real art, and how do you take enjoyment from that? And I think that now it's just so established that people really accept much more that is, you know, a legitimate medium for art. And if you remember back in the early days, you know, even before that, in kind of the 70s, when artists were really exploring video as an art form, and I guess probably before that, well, there was other artists doing that. And you know, like a lot of medium, it was fairly, you know, naive and basic in the very early days, right? There was a lot of experimentation, and it was maybe not something that now we would think of as very sophisticated, but obviously over time it became more and more so, and you kind of, you know, you need to start somewhere, and there's a lot of people that do enjoy it. And I think the great thing, again, is, you know, bringing people that are not necessarily into traditional art to kind of bring them along and to enjoy art is a really wonderful thing. How is value and provenance created with a piece of digital art? And lastly, how does a piece of digital art become an item in the collector's personal legacy, handed down to his or her inheritors? So that might be something that John can comment on, perhaps.
Is that a question that's in the chat? Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. I mean, for me, I see none of this as being philosophically any different to how we already treat edition prints. And, you know, some people do not perceive any significance in having a poster or a print that isn't the authorized edition print. And if that is you, and if you're happy to have a poster rather than the authorized thing that comes with the moral authority of originating with the artist, then that's absolutely fine. And I used to manage an art collection in a law firm, and at any time, if I wanted to, I could have photocopied the Tracy Emin monoprints that we had and produced a facsimile that would have been physically indistinguishable from a meter away. But we all agree that there's something significant in the thing that is authorized, that and that does come with the authority of the artist, and crucially holds its value and is resaleable. And those same things apply in the digital world. And as you say, there has been a market for digital work and film work and indeed photography going back a long time, where to create a market, you have to have some kind of artificial scarcity to make it work. And so none of this is all that new. And I think, yeah, people increasingly, and we're in the very, very early days of this, will associate value with those digital assets, and especially as we get the kind of new consumer hardware wearables that enable us to have an experience that's currently not that stimulating. But when Apple come out with their augmented reality glasses, which should be this year, or if every household in the UK has a VR headset, that will be a complete game changer in terms of how people react and interact with their digital assets and share them with each other.
So just to kind of extend on John's kind of thoughts there, and to answer Eve's question about how will people display this artwork, I think this is the thing. We're like at the very, very dawn of how these things are displayed, and we're kind of used, everyone's used to online viewing rooms and JPEGs on websites, but those same JPEGs, if at high enough resolution, can be put into virtual environments. So one of our partners, a bit of a shout out to Vortic, they produce a way of actually uploading, kind of both our scans into their platform, or JPEG versions of paintings. And so you can quite imagine a situation where, someone who's got a collection can use a platform like Vortic, which you can interact with through a website, but you can also put a VR headset on and go and experience it, so that you can actually kind of have that visceral experience that I alluded to earlier on, that is more than just scrolling up and down a web page. And I think we're only just beginning to see, to kind of see this kind of thing. And, you can think of, as John also mentioned, that, we are going to have Meta this year are going to launch their new headset. Apple almost certainly will launch before Christmas. Even Snapchat have actually invested billions into various AR wearable technologies. And up until now, most of these kind of VR headsets have been kind of aimed at niches. So it's been like gaming, or it's been, enterprise. And I think that we will see this year like a real push from the likes of Apple to kind of start creating this, the final platform, as people talk about it, where instead of us poking at our phones, it cannot be the future of the human race to stare into this little phone and do this.
Yeah, God, I hope not.
We've evolved in space with our hands, and it's like, as with these, we put our smart glasses on, and these things will be, computing will be in layers all around us. And
bring on the holosuites, I say.
Me, but it's going to happen. It's just a natural extension. And so this is, how will you view your art? Well, you'll be able to kind of, create an exhibition of your art in your local park or your local town square or whatever it is. And your neighbor might do the same, and they switch their layer on, and you can swipe through, the virtual exhibitions that sit in a small town square in the middle of rural Spain or whatever. Everyone will be doing this kind of thing.
Well, I would also like to say that there is a precedence for being a successful artist that believes in democratizing your artwork. For example, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, I worked on some of his stuff while I was at Tate, and I recently went to a museum opening in Prague where they were exhibiting, it was an exhibition about 100 years of kinetic art. Can you believe we've already had, which apparently kinetic art was invented in Prague, which I didn't know until going to that exhibit. And so it was really interesting to learn more about him and how, you know, he really believed in art for all. And he was also very financially successful because, you know, he had a studio that was doing commercial projects and fine art projects, and he didn't believe in the kind of snobbiness of separating those things and having, you know, different boxes to keep them in between, like design and, you know, commercial design and fine art. And, you know, he was famous for his paintings that he had fabricated in a sign shop, right, where he did the telephone paintings, I think they're called, where he phoned them up, and he literally had like a graph that he said, okay, up 3 and over 3, and then, you know, have a black square there, and he described on the phone how they should look to this sign manufacturer, and he produced paintings that way of different sizes. And you know, it was very controversial at the time to do something like that and to industrialize. And now, of course, we're so used to fabricators working for contemporary artworks, and we still feel that it's okay to spend millions on something that, you know, the artist never touched, or, you know, it wasn't their own expertise that fabricated and created that product of that thing. So, you know, we, because of conceptual art and because of you know, we kind of stand on the shoulders of a lot of artists who have explored a lot of these kinds of areas conceptually and physically with materials, and now we're just doing the kind of digital, you know, version of that. I guess that's.
I think what's been interesting, and I just saw a question pop up by Maggie, but I guess on a slightly different topic, they were asking about what's being done to prevent theft and monetization of the NFTs. And I don't know, Rafe will probably have a bit more of a view on that, but I feel like there's been a lot more invested in the security around kind of your own NFT collection and your wallets and that side of things. Is that right?
There has been to an extent, but I mean, it's still very unfriendly to users. Even sort of seasoned veterans will get phished and end up signing away NFTs. Or as one of the questions mentioned earlier, you know, how do you hand them down to your children? Even if your operational security is as good as it can be, then sort of what's the process for handing that down to your children? Hal Finney, who was rumored to invent a Bitcoin, you know, no one's been able to get hold of those coins he has. It's definitely a big problem.
Well, I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of development, right? I think that's the bottom line. And as we've been talking in the art world about blockchain now for quite a few years, you know, at least kind of 5 years, maybe more. I've attended a load of events on blockchain, and I think that I guess maybe a thought to leave you with, because we are now quite over time, so we probably should wrap up, but is that, you know, there comes a point where we have to kind of engage, or we're not going to build the infrastructure that's needed to address these issues, right? Nobody's going to do it for us in our industry. We have to step up, and we have to develop this ourselves. We have to see the value in it in the medium and long term, and we have to build it. And so we can't really wait for, you know, someone to hand us a kind of perfectly built infrastructure from some other industry. And so, you know, we have to kind of take part, which is why I've been volunteering my spare time with this AIS consortium. And I would encourage all of you on the panel and anyone else in the audience who's interested in joining and becoming a member of AIS, because that is kind of the whole, you know, purpose of that group, is to try and help shape this kind of future infrastructure that will create a healthier marketplace, but also a healthier academic, you know, digital academic environment as well, for more deep, enhanced research. And so I think that there's a lot of really interesting possibilities that, you know, kind of future-proofing provides. For example, if I have imagined for a long time, and I think that this infrastructure will facilitate this reality as a conservator, to be, if you want to do research on a material, for example, Picasso's use of house paint after the war when he couldn't get a hold of any fine art materials and how it degrades. You would need to figure out what collections have paintings of that period and that pigment, and contact the conservation studio of each one and ask them, have they done conservation on it? Can they share their records? Will they? and you may or may not get any kind of answer at all, and it will take you months to work it out. Imagine if there was like a Google for conservation where you could just type that in and, you know, immediately search across 20 different institutions and immediately get up reports that had standardized terminology where you could do analysis on those things. That would be such a wonderful resource. And, you know, in the art world, there are lots of examples of things like that where we could have so much more enhanced, in-depth data points if we would just, you know, standardize and bring together our data, which is currently very fractured and siloed. And this is partly because we haven't, you know, created a strategy and implemented it as an industry, as many other industries have. We've been very reactionary to new technologies and slow to adopt them. So I'll get off my high horse now about that subject, but does anyone else have a closing comment, and then we'll end?
I just had a quick question, actually. I think it kind of relates to Maggie's question. It's really a question for John. So there's this kind of idea that a lot of artists are complaining about their work being screenshotted by a random person and then being sold as an NFT. Like, I've had some questions from clients about that, you know, recently, and there's obviously concern surrounding that kind of thing. And I mean, my view is presumably you still, you know, you have recourse to traditional law, right? You know, you basically would just litigate if someone does that. It's the same thing as, you know, someone walks into the British Museum and takes a picture of something with their iPhone. They can start, as you said, start telling the unofficial version of that. And if it starts to impact enough on the economics of the real official version, that's when you would litigate, presumably. And that's kind of, you know, have I got, you know, that is basically the only framework for which you could do that, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in litigation on exactly this point at the moment. If you Google art wars, you can read about an interesting tale on this. But obviously litigation is expensive, and that isn't a way that everyone can police what's going on. And so the question is a good one. But one thing I've seen that has changed dramatically in 12 months is the standards that buyers have when buying something. So 12 months ago, you could launch an NFT project and you could be completely anonymous. You could have no legal entity standing behind it. You could have no terms and conditions, and yet people would still buy it. But having had 12 months of scams and project owners going missing, people are a lot more discerning now. And so that's why my work has increased so much, because anyone who's building something new wants to do it properly, wants to have a identified legal entity in place, and wants to have terms and conditions in place that give buyers confidence that someone is standing behind that and making them some legally enforceable promises. And if they're found to have been infringing other artists' intellectual property, the value of that thing will fall off a cliff. And so so buyers, the market is forcing it in some ways, because the market now will only buy digital items where it seems clear that there's a reputable team behind it and they have permission to do what they're doing.
I think that's the important thing. What we'd like to try and figure out with this pilot that we're doing, and going back to the kind of the fractionalization idea again. You know, I've talked to, you know, number of people about how, you know, we expect that the vast majority, if it was, for instance, us scanning an object in, depends on the profile of the artist, you know, and the agreement, but the vast majority of the kind of value of the NFT would still reside with the artist and or their gallery, you know, and their kind of representatives. But then you kind of could have a portion of that allocated for, you know, in our case, there's a small portion for scanning if that's an element of the NFT. Obviously, there'll be other NFTs that aren't, they're purely digital, they didn't need scanning. But, you know, from a legal point of view, you can imagine where there's a small percentage that is given over to, you know, the legal kind of, you know, bucket of funds that Canvas Art Law could, you know, have, if they're part of that group that, you know, Canvas Art will represent that NFT, and you know, if you buy that NFT, that over the next 10 years, because of secondary sales and these kind of things, that you've built up a bucket of kind of defense cash that allows you to defend anyone who's bought an NFT that you're kind of, you know, there's kind of different ways of, you know, of doing it. So it's not all upfront hourly fee. You a bit like we expect to do. At the moment, we are so expensive, we lock ourselves out of a lot of markets. So we can see the NFT as a way of perhaps reducing our initial outlay for some kind of upside of something later down the line. Now, if you're a higher profile enough artist and gallery, you might say, well, I'm not interested in that. I just want to pay you for your time and that's it. But there might be like, we know that there's some kind of, you know, non-mega galleries who've approached us with, you know, high profile artists, but they still can't actually, because it's quite expensive for us to create our scans. It's like we say, it's like tailoring. It's like going to Savile Row and having your, you know, your suit fitted. You know, we are creating the absolute best quality version, digital version of that we can get. And if you can you can imagine how those things become more valuable if there's a number of people involved in that fractionalization, all of who have credibility. So the legal's handled by, you know, X law firm that is known to be an expert in NFTs, scanning by us perhaps, you know, the conditioning report is always done by Articheck, you know, that you can kind of see how that would give the, you know, the value of the NFT itself, you know, more kind of credence, as it were.
I'm sorry, we're really over time and we're going to have to stop now. But it was very interesting conversation. As I said before, I think it may be the case that we will need to have another conversation about NFTs before, you know, ArtEvolve is finished, because it's a very broad and interesting and constantly evolving subject. And so, but yeah, I really thank you all so much for joining us. And I think that the comments suggest that the virtual space was enjoyed by all. So thank you and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Hosting. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.